This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 16th of May in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico fights for his life after an attempted assassination.
Xi Jinping tells Vladimir Putin the China-Russia relationship should last generations.
And running ahead, the US Bureau of Labour Statistics accidentally publishes inflation data 30 minutes early.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has suffered serious injuries after being shot multiple times in public while meeting supporters. His situation was described as extraordinarily serious, but there are now reports that he is recovering after surgery. The dominant political figure in the country since the fall of communism, Fico returned to power last year with a Russia-friendly stance that has increasingly put him at odds with other EU leaders. The country's Interior Minister Mateusz Szujewski says the attack was politically motivated.
I followed the critical condition of the PM. I was in the operating theatre with the Minister of Defence. I wanted to see how someone can deal with hate this way. Please, hate should not come in response to hate.
The Slovak Interior Minister there speaking through a translator. A man in his 70s has been arrested. It's the first assassination attempt on an EU leader in more than 2 decades.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has told Vladimir Putin that he is prepared to consolidate the bond between the countries for, quote, generations to come, as the two leaders hold talks in Beijing. Putin is aiming to ensure support for his government in the country's ongoing war with Ukraine. Bloomberg's Stephen Engel says the visit is crucial for Russia.
I think it's absolutely vital for Vladimir Putin. Absolutely. I mean, China has proven to be the vital lifeline, if you will, as the war heads into its deep into its 3rd year now. And again, Moscow relies on Beijing for the overwhelming amount of trade and economic support. I'm not necessarily saying that its products from China are supporting the war, but they have found the dual-use technologies have been finding their way onto the battlefield, whether it's semiconductors, ball bearings or other equipment.
That was our Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel speaking. Putin and Xi have met more than 40 times since the Chinese president came to power in 2012. The two leaders declared a no-limits friendship just weeks before Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
The latest US inflation data was released 30 minutes early, raising concerns about the handling of sensitive economic information. There were no signs that the early publication moved markets, but the incident will likely prompt further scrutiny of the Bureau of Labour Statistics. Core CPI cooled for the first time in 6 months in April, news that helped the S&P 500 to end the day at an all-time high. David Kelly, Chief Global Strategist at JP Morgan Asset Management, says the US economy is stabilising.
I think what we've got is a moderation in the US economy, both in terms of growth and inflation. Inflation is taking its sweet time coming down, but we still think it's a downward trend. And I think, the reason for the market reaction is that we didn't get an upside surprise. So we've now had 3 reports. We've had the jobs report, then we had the consumer sentiment report, and now we've had the retail sales report. And they're all saying, overall things are moderating here.
JP Morgan's David Kelly speaking there. Now, core consumer prices rose by 0.3% in April, with housing and fuel costs driving much of the increase. That news sparked a rally in treasuries, while the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index hit a 1-month low.
Ben Bernanke says that senior members of the Bank of England have shown interest in publishing their own rate projections. The former Fed chief led a review into the central bank's forecasting this year after the Bank of England's failure to anticipate a post-COVID surge in inflation. Bernanke told MPs that the bank needs to move away from using government and market assumptions to model its forecasts for the UK economy.
I would be disappointed if the bank did not seriously review the possibility at some point in the next couple of years. And I guess I'd like to add at this point that I've told the bank that I would be happy to continue to advise and consult to the extent that that would be useful. And of course, that would be something that I would be interested in observing.
Bernanke also reiterated his report's criticism of the Bank of England's internal forecasting. He said the Bank of England was distracted by maintaining its infrastructure because it was putting out fires and dealing with criticism from MPs and the public.
HSBC is leaning towards its next boss being an internal hire. Bloomberg has learned that CFO George El-Hedry and the head of wealth and personal banking Nuno Matos are seen as likely hires. Current CEO Noel Quinn says whoever his successor is, they face a global landscape that's increasingly hard to navigate.
If you want to be CEO of a bank and an international bank, you have to get used to dealing with complexity and turning complexity into relative simplicity for our people. 200,000 people need to serve clients, even if the world is complex. Any CEO of any international bank is going to have to deal with complexity on the international scene.
HSBC CEO Noel Quinn speaking there at the Qatar Economic Forum this week. He announced he would be retiring last month. Sources added the search is only just beginning and the board could change direction.
Netflix says that monthly active users of its advertising-supported subscription plan now top 40 million. That's up by 5 million just 1 year. That's up from 5 million just 1 year ago. The streaming giant says that it now plans to launch an in-house ad technology platform to support this growing part of its business. It comes as Netflix also announced plans to stream a number of NFL games in the firm's latest push into live events.
And some breaking news this hour. The CEO of EasyJet, Johan Lundgren, is to step down early next year. This after the low-cost airline reported first half headline pre-tax loss slightly less than had been expected of £350 million. The first half revenue figure came in slightly ahead of expectations, as well as the second half seat capacity coming in slightly higher than had been predicted by analysts at 59 million. That's the latest breaking news on EasyJet. Well, let's bring you more details on our top stories now. Slovakia's Prime Minister is still being treated in hospital this morning after an assassination attempt in the central town of Handlova yesterday. A 71-year-old man has been arrested. Police believe he has a clear political motive. Let's get the latest now from our senior Central and Eastern Europe reporter Andrea Dudic. Andrea, good morning. What is the latest that we know about Robert Fico's condition this morning?
Good morning. The information actually is quite sketchy at the moment because the latest information we have is that he may be out of life-threatening condition and is recovering after surgery. But what we're really waiting to hear is from the government or the medical staff wider confirmation that this is indeed the case. We haven't heard from any of the government or medical staff for hours now.
OK. What do we know about what happened yesterday, Andrea?
Robert Fico is a very popular politician in Slovakia, and he often takes his government to towns and cities outside the capital, which is exactly what happened yesterday. And after the government meeting in Handlova, he went and wanted to talk to his supporters, as he often does, and one of them attacked him. And Robert Fico, the prime minister, was whisked away to a nearby hospital and then transferred to another facility for surgery.
What's been the reaction from leaders in Slovakia, Andrea?
The reaction was one of shock, disbelief, and also it showed the sort of split that has gripped the nation over the last few years. Most people have said that rebuke this horrible act of violence against the prime minister, but then some of his allies said that it was the media and the opposition were to blame for what happened, that they have escalated this split in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Fico, 59 years old. There was also a video of what happened yesterday, and so I think perhaps the shock even greater given that was seen. And it's not just in Slovakia; it's across Europe that I think there's been shock, because it's the first time that we've seen such an assassination attempt on a leader for at least a couple of decades. It's a very significant event.
Andrea Dudic, our senior reporter, thank you very much for joining us with the latest on that story.
Well, let's continue our discussions then around Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has met with China's Xi Jinping as part of a trip designed to ensure support for Moscow as the war in Ukraine continues. The two leaders have also been attending a signing ceremony of cooperation documents. This according to Xinhua News this morning. President Xi has talked about how China and Russia should further strengthen their development and that they have exchanged views on international and regional issues. Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Asia Government and Politics correspondent Rebecca Chung Wilkins. Rebecca, thank you for being with us. So Putin and Xi signing these documents, we've been looking at pictures coming in from China of this. How significant then is this meeting and, as they say, exchange of views on a range of issues?
Well, they're certainly one another's sort of most important allies when it comes to this bigger geopolitical agenda of building the so-called multipolar world, pushing back on what they see as sort of the US hegemony. But of course, since Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, there has been a much deeper imbalance in that relationship. Russia has needed China economically far more than it has ever done in the past, and there have been these sort of points of friction. So despite the so-called no limits relationship between the two, what we've seen is time and time again there are certain constraints to that. There was one discussion, for example, between over the gas pipeline that's sort of known as the Power of Siberia 2. Now, this is an issue where Russia has always sort of typically plays this up as an imminent deal being done, and Beijing has sort of dragged its feet a little bit more, wanting a more favorable deal. So I'm looking really closely to see if there's any progress on that over the next couple of days. It looks like there isn't. But so when we look at these sort of really key big issues, we don't see an enormous amount of progress so far, at least.
Rebecca, how difficult is it for China to continue to support Russia without further antagonising the US?
It has certainly been a challenge. I mean, just this month, I think US has tightened sanctions on perceived or alleged Chinese support for Russia twice already. And these sort of threats of US reprisals for what they say is China's support for Russia's industrial war machine have sort of upped the ante. And in fact, in March, we saw trade between Russia and China fall for the first time since 2022, possibly in that context of people being somewhat more, companies rather, I should say, being somewhat more circumspect about the type of support they're offering. But rhetorically, at least, this is a very sort of full-throated support that we're seeing from Xi Jinping for Putin, must be sort of gratifying. This commitment that China's ready to work with Russia as a good neighbor, friend and partner is precisely what Putin wants to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow actually the meeting, the press conference that they're giving, or the address at least, between Putin and Xi on the terminal live, this joint briefing. So as you say, the red carpet is being rolled out. You can see it from the pomp and circumstance around them. But what do you think is China's primary interest here? If you say that Xi Jinping's been a bit foot-dragging in some of the deals with Russia.
I think on the one hand, China is a little bit careful about not sort of exacerbating or not wanting to enrage the US, particularly when it's so focused on trying to get its economy back up and running. But on the other hand, Russia is, and Moscow does present an important ally in pushing back and offering, or appearing at least to offer, an alternative to the US-led world order. I mean, Russia is a really important partner historically, and even more so now as we see this sort of deepening fractures of the world. We saw hints of that even in President Xi's trip during Europe, for example, the mention and the visit to Belgrade on the 25th anniversary of the Belgrade bombing. That's a nod to the sort of deep distrust of NATO, the close ties, and the visit to Hungary and Serbia, both countries that maintain very close ties to Moscow within Europe. So you can also see that Xi, as much as he's trying to sort of tamper down the sort of tensions with the US and with Europe, still placing that relationship with Russia, this alternative world order, very much front and center of his foreign policy agenda.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.